and welcome to our series of creative entrepreneurship webinars. My name is Lynsey Smith, and I will be your facilitator for this webinar. This series of webinars is part of Inspire, a project funded by the European Union to support the development of an effective policy framework for the vibrant creative economy in Turkey. The action is implemented by GIZ, the German Development Agency, to build the capacity of the Ministry of Technology and Industry and the development agencies in Istanbul and Izmir. It's lovely to see you again. So just to give you an overview, this is webinar 3 of a 5-part series of webinars. This webinar is called Leading Your Business. We have done Designing Your Business Part 1, Designing Your Business Part 2. And the webinars that will follow this one are Engaging with Your Audience Part 1, Engaging with Your Audience Part 2. The webinars last approximately 45 minutes and have a variety of tools, resources, and editorial pieces that you can look at online afterwards. So leading your business, what is this webinar about? This webinar will explore your own personal leadership style, different types of leadership and how best to communicate, along with the importance of reflection. It will also aim to recreate your idea of what a leader is. A lot of us have that more traditional idea of a leader as being someone a little bit older, someone who maybe to show emotion or vulnerability, it would be wrong, and someone to kind of follow the traditional routes of leadership. We want to change all that, and we want to change your mind on that with this webinar. So in this webinar, I'll be covering 5 different elements to give you a taster of how to look at your own leadership style and the leadership style of those around you. The first tool I want to go over is called a user manual for me. Now, this tool was developed by someone called Cassie Robinson, an amazing woman, who had taken on a brand new team and wanted to really get to know them really quickly in order to know their strengths and weaknesses and how best to work with them, because what she had to do, she had to move on really fast. And there are lots of ways to build good teams and working relationships, but I do feel that this very simple tool is a good first starter for anyone, whether you are new to the organisation or whether you've got a relatively new team, or maybe your team has gone through a lot of change and you just want to refresh things. This tool is a really good way of understanding yourself and your own leadership style, but also getting your team, your senior leadership team, to fill it in to also understand theirs. Because until we understand how best other people work, we won't get the best out of them. So there, as you can see, there's kind of 8 quadrants. There's conditions I like to work in, the times and hours I like to work, the best ways to communicate with, the ways I like to get feedback, things I need, things I struggle with, things I love, and other things to know about me. And you can interject quite a lot of personal qualities into this. This doesn't have to be all very plain traditional answers. The more you inject yourself into this, the better. So just to give you a feel, this is mine. So the conditions that I like to work in, well, I like to work from home. I enjoy working from a shared office once or twice a month. So I like to, I live in Scotland and I live in the middle of nowhere. So once a month I like to go to an office in order just to get a little bit of energy from a few other people that I work alongside. I like a tidy space, always with a window. I like to make a space my own with plants and prints, a diffuser. Those kind of haptic things are really important to me, and dogs are always welcome. The times and hours I like to work. Well, I work Mondays to Thursdays because I homeschool my 5-year-old son on a Friday, and I tend to keep a really strong boundary with that and make sure that nothing interferes with that, and don't answer any calls on a Friday or any emails unless it's urgent. I work best in the morning. I prefer to start my day with a task rather than emails. And that's just because of the way that my day works. I have to finish earlier to pick up my son. And so I like the big tasks in the morning and the kind of smaller tasks after lunch. And then I run for my son for school. And I'm sure a lot of us can share in that whole childcare juggle with work, especially us freelancers. The best ways to communicate with me, well, I never answer my phone to unscheduled calls, but I do respond to WhatsApp messages. So what I mean by that is if I'm speaking to somebody, I'm not going to answer my call, because actually that's you showing that person that you favour that person on the call over them. And I want to be completely present in the conversation that I'm in. I prefer to have difficult conversations while walking outside. When my business partner and I ran a creative network, I used to always say, if you get any difficult conversations, can we go for a walk? Because just being out of a room, I felt quite claustrophobic in a room, especially if it didn't have a window. And having a walk, the person's at that side of you rather than facing on, and you can really bring up some difficult, feelings and situations and emotions and work them through, because you're working your body as well as your mind at the same time. So I find that really useful. I don't look at my inbox when I'm on holiday, and I prefer informal to formal. Yeah, the ways I like to get feedback. I'm not great with critique, and so I prefer it in a sandwich, which is give me something good, give me the hard bit, then finish in something good. I like to deal with problems as and when they arise. I don't like things gathering negative momentum. Let's bring it up, let's sort it out. And I don't like negative feedback in emails. Give it to me face to face, whether walking outside or over coffee. Things I need, I like to work mainly by myself, but in partnership or collaboration with others. I need to feel trusted and appreciated. I sometimes need to reflect and brainstorm, as I am an introvert thinker. So that means that maybe I'm in a meeting with a few different people, partners, clients, collaborators, and we're trying to come up with ideas. And sometimes I need to say, I'm going to come back with some thoughts, because I need to go away, kind of distill what the conversation was, and then come back with some ideas. And it's okay to do that. I think it's just being clear that that's what you're doing, rather than coming across as passive and not providing input towards those conversations. Things I struggle with. I'm good with the start and middle of projects. Now, this is really good to get your team to highlight what part of projects are their strength areas, because none of us are strong on start, middle, and end. It's a combination of all, and it's a good idea to have your team a combination of all. So yeah, I'm good with the start and the middle, but I lose interest towards the end, and I really do struggle with detail. I struggle massively with hierarchy and prefer to work in a flat hierarchy. I am an instinctive worker, so my approach might not always make sense to others, but I always get there. So what I mean by that is some people have a kind of traditional kind of approach to things, that those kind of stepped approach, whereas I might kind of go that way and then go that way, but I'll always get to the end. I always meet the deadline, and I usually come up with more at the end. Things I love. I love experimenting, positive risk-taking, and designing new ways of doing things. I love problem solving, strategy, and big picture thinking. I love people. My instinct will always be to protect the person over the project. And by that, I mean, let's push the deadline back rather than affect somebody's health and well-being to get the project done by a particular date. The person is more important than the project. Other things to know about me, well, my ethos is to work with good people to do good things. My work is not my life. I have clear boundaries to protect my family time. I can never go into something not being me, and I have a young son, so my work might have to flex around him at times. So from that, if you were working with me, you would know, okay, Lynsey, probably if I've got a difficult conversation, I need to take her out for what will I get Lynsey involved in? Or the start and the middle of something. Okay, there's a big problem. Lynsey will be good at sorting that out. Okay, where does Lynsey work best? What times does Lynsey work best? And look, you can't fulfill all these requests, every single request in somebody's manual, but you can try and get the main ones right. And the more you get them right, the more you build those connections with your team, the more you know who's strongest to go to for particular things. Also when someone is maybe not very good at saying, I don't know how to do that, but they've put it in their manual, and so that's not their area of strength. Okay. And as I said there, a manual of me works best when you share it with others. So when my business plan and I first started up our business, first thing we did was a manual for each other, for ourselves, and shared it with each other. Now, we had been working in an organisation for 9 years before that. And when we did that manual, there were so many things that we didn't realise, that we didn't know about each other. I don't really like surprises. My business partner's totally fine with surprises. I prefer to work in the morning. She prefers to work in the afternoon. It was really interesting things, but it was really interesting to do this really short tool. And it could be an exercise you do with your whole team, to take a Friday afternoon out and just say, right, everyone do one of these, and don't put anything in there that's too sensitive, that's not shareable, because what you'll do is once they send them all back to you, or you take their prints, you save them in a folder, which is a shared folder with the team, and then everyone's got access to them. Everyone knows how best to work with each other. So I really like that tool, and it's worked for me on a few different angles. I've also gone in to do a kind of business review of an organisation, and the first thing I did was get the whole team to do this, because they lacked a kind of gel, they weren't kind of on the same page, and needed some help in their kind of team building, I suppose. And they really loved this, and it really helped change the direction of that organisation for the better. So now we're going to Me as It. Now you might have heard of this. This is it's a foundation model of leadership excellence. It's 3 circles that they believe a good leader should be across all times. Now, you can't be across all 3 at once, all of the time. It's just about knowing how to navigate it. So you've got Me, which refers to your individual leadership. So what are you making sure you're getting right? What are you making sure how are you supporting yourself as a leader? Do you need mentoring? Do you need some one-to-one support? Do you need some coaching? Are there some training needs that you may be required to be the leader that you need to be? So that's all about Me, the leader, you, the leader. Then there's the Us. The Us refer to the team, and that could be a team of 2, a team of 10, a team of 100, you name it. And that's all about team leadership. How best to work with your team, how best to get the best out of your team. What do your team need to do that? For instance, do you need some team building exercises? Is the team not really gelling? Do you need something to bring them together to connect them better? Or have quite a lot of the team members change role? Do they need some capacity building, some training and development? Do some of them maybe need some mentoring because you can't be there all the time? So maybe having a mentor involved in some of the cases. Making sure that you as an individual leader and your team are strong as possible, so that that's already you're on a winner. And then the third circle is strategic leadership, the it. Now, the it is the business. That is the values. That is your purpose. That is what you do, whether it's your service, whether it's you're selling a service, a product, an experience, or a mixture of all those. That is that third quadrant is, or circle, is all looking at, what maybe that's like business models, business plans, operational models, finance models, how best to design your strategic leadership of your business, organisation, or institution. And this model is really good to use to identify where you've been focusing and where you're currently and where you need to go next. Now, it's not one of those things that you can say on a Monday and a Tuesday, I'm going to look after the team, and then on a Wednesday and a Thursday, I'm going to look after me, and on a Friday, I'm going to look after the strategic leadership. It's just something that you will naturally move across. But what you need to keep in mind is that you are moving across, or that you're working across 2 at the same time, at different times, and that you have all 3 in mind whenever you are, leading at the front. In terms of leadership styles, there's lots of leadership styles out there, but the 6 go-tos that I go to are these ones. And this is from T-Shirts and Suits, A Guide to Business and Creativity, a really brilliant book, which I'll put at the end of the webinar as one of the pieces. So in this book, they outline 6 kind of main archetypes or styles of leadership. And of course, online, you will see so much more. But for now, let's look at these ones. So you've got the coercive leadership style, which is kind of your dictator. Now, this is a dominant macho leadership style. It is appropriate in emergencies and severe situations, but otherwise will tend to disempower and disillusion subordinates. Now, you'll see this in political figures, mostly the not so good political figures, and some entrepreneurs as well. Steve Jobs is a good example of this, and Steve Jobs, I'll talk about in a minute, does kind of traverse across a couple of different styles over his career, but at the start of his career, he was a coercive leader. So he really demanded high standards and strict policies. Elon Musk is also in this camp, partly in this camp, because he, does mass layoffs and gives ultimatums to achieve goals. So anyone who relies on threats, punishments, fear to motivate their team is classed as coercive. Now, what I should have said is sometimes your leadership style and a best leader does kind of navigate across a few different ones here. They don't really sit in just one. However, the coercive one can tend to sit in that camp quite a lot. Then going on to authoritative style of leadership, the kind of visionary. This style focuses on the goal or vision of the future and inspires others to follow. This is appropriate when a new direction is required or a clarification of the goals to be achieved. An example of this would be Bill Gates and Martin Luther King Jr. Then you've got affiliative style of leadership, the people person. Here, there is a focus on people, team building, bonding, and forging alliances. This style is useful in creating teams or for healing dysfunctional relationships. Now, an example of this could be the Dalai Lama and also Richard Branson, who are examples of this style of leadership. It's all about empowering others, getting the best out of others, that kind of really kind, all about the people approach. The democratic style of leadership, the listener. This is a useful style to adopt when attempting to involve a wide range of people in decision-making or building a consensus. Steve Jobs actually moved into this camp. Now, he was originally founder of Apple, and then I think he was kicked out 10 or 15 years, or so afterwards. And when he came back to the company later on, he came back with a completely different leadership style. He moved out of a coercive style and he moved into a democratic style. And that was a massive change in the company as well. So it can show that if you start off as coercive, hopefully you'll learn the ways of a better leadership style and move out of that. The pace-setting style of leadership, the kind of Superman, Superwoman approach. Using this style, the leader sets an example by working to extremely high standards of performance. This is useful to raise the stakes when a competent and motivated team is working well. Now, this is not sustainable in the long run. You need to set the right pace for the team. So Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's first Prime Minister, he had this particular style of leadership where he paid civil servants a higher wage in the private sector. And he also invested a lot into education, but was known for really pushing people to the limits. And teams cannot last if you are pushing them and pushing them and pushing them. And, a high level is, of course, what you want to, a high level of quality and output is always what you want, but you also have to realise that you have to make sure that everyone is supported adequately in order to perform to that level. And then the coaching style of leadership, the nurturer. This style focuses on helping to improve people's strengths and is especially useful in building skills to develop managers and future leaders. So this kind of style is the one that would provide kind of constructive feedback, foster a collaborative environment, and help individuals reach their full potential. Satya Nadella is a wonderful example of this. He's CEO of Microsoft, and there's lots of videos online. He's got such a gentle, kind of nurturing approach to how he gets the best out of his team. And I really advise you to have a little look online at some of his videos. They're absolutely fantastic. So I've highlighted 2 leadership styles in red, and these are the ones I would advise that you really don't hover over for. If for any reason you have to go into these camps, make sure you're not in them for long, because your team will not last. You won't get the best out of your team, and they're just not sustainable. I would highly recommend you move across the authoritative, the affiliative, the democratic, and the coaching style more so. For kind of emergency responses, of course, you know, we've just had a pandemic, we've had major climate issues, we have major climate issues, we've got major cost of living crisis. A lot of that, yes, a lot of leaders have had to move into the coercive style of leadership to get things moving really quickly. However, I highly recommend you do not stay in there permanently and that you move on to one of the other ones that aren't red. And here's one video I'd like to share with you with Satya on his leadership style.
When you think about what defines modern companies and work, it's all about collaboration. No big thing gets done by one individual. Things get done by teams and collaboration. And so to me at Microsoft, we spend a lot of time thinking about not only collaboration and how we ourselves come together as one Microsoft to build the products, the services, the innovations our customers deeply care about, but more importantly, even the tools we use. I'm a very big believer that for any institution, any organization to endure and to have long-term success, it needs to be grounded in a sense of purpose that is renewed every day. In our case, when we talk about empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more, they're not just a set of words. For us, it's about being able to do the hard work of building technology so that others can build more technology. And
Go back to that one, sorry, I clicked out. Apologies about that.
when you think about what to endure and to have long
Start from the beginning, maybe we can cut that bit.
when you think about what defines modern companies and work, it's all about collaboration. No big thing gets done by one individual. Things get done by teams and collaboration. And so to me at Microsoft, we spend a lot of time thinking about not only collaboration and how we ourselves come together as one Microsoft to build the products, the services, the innovations our customers deeply care about, but more importantly, even the tools we use. I'm a very big believer that for any institution, any organization to endure and to have long-term success, it needs to be grounded in a sense of purpose that is renewed every day. In our case, when we talk about empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more, they're not just a set of words. For us, it's about being able to do the hard work of building technology so that others can build more technology and staying true to that. You know, across Microsoft, we're always experimenting in how can we empower our own employees more. For example, the annual hackathon we do is a great opportunity for people across the company to get outside of any narrow boundaries we may have set up as organizations so that they can go work on things that matter the most to them personally and to customer needs that they seek and see out there. When I think about innovation, the word that comes to mind for me is empathy. Because if you think about the source of innovation, it's all about being able to meet the unmet, unarticulated needs of customers. And in order for us to be able to do that successfully, you need to have empathy. And to me, empathy is not something you go to work and switch on the button called empathy. It's more about being able to let life teach you how to become more empathetic, how to listen beyond even the words from your customers and partners, and then innovate. And that to me is what drives innovation.
So I think that's a lovely example, you know, that idea of empathy as innovation. You know, 5, 10, 15 years ago, the idea of a leader talking about empathy was kind of a no-no, to be honest. But it's becoming more and more almost on trend. It's more and more of a trend to be kind in business. I remember going to a talk 20 years ago, and it was the CEO of the Eden Project, Sir Tim Smith, who is an amazing man. And he spent quite a bit of his conversation or his talk to the audience saying how important it was to take your time when you come into your business or place of work to really make sure you say hello to everybody, make sure you know everyone's names, everyone's roles. So many businesses CEOs will come in and they don't know everyone's names. He also does a thing, I think it's once or twice a year, he gets the senior directors, the directors and senior management to take on a role which is maybe a kind of lower grade role within the organisation for a couple of days. So his role, for instance, was to work in the cafeteria for, I don't know if he did it for 2 days or 5 days. And in that time, you realised that the air conditioning wasn't working. I was like, why is the air conditioning not working? And the team said, oh, we've asked senior management to fix it, but they've not been able to. And so it's just understanding how each element of your business works. If you're not in it, you can't represent it properly and you can't support it properly. And I thought that was a wonderful kind of insight from Tim about really understanding your organisation from the ground up. So the next element I wanted to talk about is radical candor. I just wanted to give you a bit of a taster for this one. So radical candor is it's a new term, and it was coined by someone called Kim Scott, who describes this idea as to care personally and challenge directly at the same time. It kind of demystifies the idea that in order to be professional, you have to be non-emotional. So just to very quickly, there's 4 quadrants here, and I'll just talk through them quickly. So you've got radical candor. Now this is where she believes is the ultimate place to be, where you care personally and you challenge directly. So it might be that there's a storm in the background here. I don't know if you can all hear it. Scotland has been hit by a storm. So the ideal situation, if you're sitting down to, for example, an employee, and you have a difficult conversation with them, you want to show that you really care about them, but also you want to challenge directly. So whether it's a difficult conversation about their performance, or whether it's actually getting the best out of them and pushing them a little bit more, you want to make sure that you're able to show that you care, but you will be direct with your questions, and that gets the best out of them. She says that if you move into any of the other quadrants, you're in trouble. So for instance, if you move down to the obnoxious aggression quadrant, that's when you challenge directly, but you're not showing any care. And so that's when you make your employee or your colleague feel really uncomfortable and you're not going to get the best out of them. When you move into the manipulative insincerity, that's when you challenge directly. You don't challenge and you don't care. That's when you're not really asking any questions and you're not really showing any care. So an example of that might be someone that is in maybe you work alongside, you don't really get on, but they've got a problem with somebody else. Rather than saying, why don't you just go to that person directly and talk about it? Or maybe I'll come with you, let's just work this out. You just don't offer any kind of direct feedback and you don't really give them a sense of caring about what the issue is. Ruinous empathy. This is when you deeply care, but you don't challenge at all. So this is when you're sitting really empathizing with the person, but that actually makes the situation worse. And we know that even with sitting down with family and friends with problems, if you just sit and say, I know that's awful that that's happened to you, but don't offer any kind of, how can we get out of this? What do you think would make it better? Then they're just in a circle of constant empathy. That's not a good quadrant to be in either. So Kim says and suggests that we should always be in this radical candor area. She's written a book, so if any of you want to know a little bit more about it, that's her book, obviously called Radical Candor. And here's a very short video just to hear in her words how she explains it.
Hi, I'm Kim Scott, and I'm the author of Radical Candor. It's a very simple idea, and if you can put it into practice, it will help you do the very best work of your life and build the best relationships of your career. all I mean by radical candor is care personally and challenge directly at the same time. Why is that so complicated? To explain why, I'm going to offer you a radical candor framework, a 2x2 framework. All of life's hardest problems really can be boiled down to a good 2x2 framework. Care personally, challenge directly. Let's take each dimension in turn. First of all, care personally. This is what I think of as the give a damn dimension of radical candor. And what happens here begins when we're about 18, 19, 20 years old. The problem begins then. We're right at that moment in our lives. We get our first job, but our egos are maximally fragile and our personas are beginning to solidify. And right at that moment, someone comes along and says, be professional. And for an awful lot of us, we sort of translate that to mean to leave your emotions, leave your true identity, leave your humanity, leave everything that's best about you at home and show up at work like some kind of robot. And you can't possibly care personally if you're showing up at work like some kind of robot. So what I encourage folks to do is to really be more than just professional, not be unprofessional, but really create the kind of environments in your workplaces where you can bring real human relationships. You can develop real human relationships at work. However, love is not all you need. You also need the other dimension of radical candor. This is what I think of as the challenge directly dimension, or the willingness to piss people off. And this is hard because from the moment we learn how to speak, starting when we're 18 months old, not 18 years old, our parents come along and they say to us some version of, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And I would argue that now that you are working, it's your job to say it. So this is hard. Radical candor is hard. It's hard because of this be professional training since we got our first job, since we were 18 years old. And it's hard because of this, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all training. That's been pounded into our heads since we learned to speak at 18 months old or however old we were. One of the things that I've done to try to make it a little bit easier is to give a name to what happens when we fail on one dimension or another, which we all do multiple times a day. So sometimes we remember to challenge directly, but we forget to show that we care personally. And this I call obnoxious aggression. In an early draft of Radical Candor, I called this the asshole quadrant because it seemed, I don't know, more radically candid. But I stopped doing that for a very important reason. As soon as I did that, people would use this framework to start writing names and boxes. And I beg of you, don't use this framework that way. Think about radical candor like a compass that is going to help guide specific conversations that you're having with specific people to a better place. Now, very often when we realize we've acted like a jerk and we've landed in the obnoxious aggression quadrant, rather than moving up on the care personally dimension, it is our instinct to go the wrong way on challenge directly. And the problem there is that then you wind up in the very worst place of all, manipulative insincerity. And this is where passive aggressive behavior, political behavior, backstabbing behavior creeps in. The kind of stuff that makes work intolerable. And it's kind of fun to tell stories about obnoxious aggression and manipulative insincerity. But the fact of the matter is, because that's where the drama is, but the fact of the matter is the vast majority of us make the vast majority of our mistakes in this last quadrant, where we do remember to show that we care personally. It turns out most people are actually pretty nice, but we're so concerned about not hurting someone's feelings that we fail to tell them something they'd be better off knowing. And this is what I call ruinous empathy. So one of the things that I want to do in the next couple of seconds is just offer you an order of operations. How can you begin to put these ideas into practice? Start by soliciting radical candor, especially soliciting criticism. Don't dish it out until you prove that you can take it. So you want to solicit first. Now you're in a better place to start giving radical candor. And remember, radical candor is just as much about praise, even more about praise, than it is about criticism. You want to focus on the good stuff but you don't want to ignore problems either. So that's giving radical candor. Now, in order to make sure that these conversations are good, the next thing you need to do is to gauge it. If there were an objective measure of radical candor, I could just post on a blog post somewhere what the right words are, but there aren't necessarily right words. What you need to do is understand how what you are saying lands for the other person. So radical candor gets measured not at the speaker's mouth, but at the listener's ear. So if the person is upset, if they're angry, if they're sad, that's your cue to attend to the care personally dimension of radical candor, to understand the human need behind the upset. But if the person just isn't hearing you, which actually, even though you fear the strong emotions, what usually happens is you work up your courage to say something and then the person doesn't even hear you. When they don't hear you, that's your cue to move out on the challenge directly dimension of radical candor. And last but not least, encourage it. All too often, one person who we know comes and starts talking to us badly about another person who's not in the room. And it's tempting to listen. It's tempting to think that you're being an empathetic colleague, an empathetic friend to listen. This is the one time when listening is not your friend. All you're doing is stirring the political pot. When that happens, the thing to do is to encourage that person to go talk to the person with whom they're having the problem, the conflict. So encourage radical candor. Thank you so much for your time. Go forth and be radically candid.
So yeah, I mean, she's got a really lovely approach to how to deal with that, with the approach. And again, just like your idea of leadership, that idea of being quite direct and also caring, it's still quite a new approach to leadership. But I think we can learn a lot from her approach. And she does have a Radical Candor podcast, which I would really, say to have a little look at. And while we're on talking about radical candor, I also thought I would pick up the idea of failing. One of our other things that we just do not talk about enough is failure. And failure is sometimes we learn more from failure than from success, and yet we don't talk about it. And I think the more we talk about what we failed in and how we got out of it and how we changed everything and how we never did that again, I think that's true learning. Anyway, on a kind of podcast level, there's one called How to Fail with Elizabeth Day, who's just amazing. And each time she interviews a different person and asks them to talk about 3 failures in their life. And they turn out to be really quite fundamental failures, and how they overcame them. And it's really interesting, not only on a personal and emotional level, but also sometimes on a business level. So I recommend having a look at both of those podcasts if you want to learn more about any of those. I also just want to show this quick video from Celeste Headlee, who talks about kind of 10 basic rules to mastering conversations. She's basically saying everything you've learned, scrap it. Here she is.
Thanks. Where this becomes a different kind of talk. All right, I want to see a show of hands. How many of you have ever unfriended someone on Facebook because they said something offensive about politics or religion, childcare, food? And how many of you know at least one person that you avoid because you just don't want to talk to them? You know, it used to be that in order to have a polite conversation, we just had to follow the advice of Henry Higgins and My Fair Lady, stick to the weather and your health. But these days, with climate change and anti-vaxxing, those subjects are not safe either. So this world that we live in, this world in which every conversation has the potential to devolve into an argument, where our politicians can't speak to one another, and where even the most trivial of issues have someone fighting both passionately for it and against it, it's not normal. Pew Research did a study of 10,000 American adults, and they found that at this moment, we are more polarized, we are more divided than we ever have been in history. We're less likely to compromise, which means we're not listening to each other. And we make decisions about where to live, who to marry, and even who our friends are going to be based on what we already believe. Again, that means we're not listening to each other. A conversation requires a balance between talking and listening, and somewhere along the way, we lost that balance. Now, part of that is due to technology, the smartphones that you all either have in your hands or close enough that you could grab them really quickly. According to Pew Research, about a third of American teenagers send more than 100 texts a day. And many of them, almost most of them, are more likely to text their friends than they are to talk to them face to face. There's this great piece in The Atlantic. It was written by a high school teacher named Paul Barnwell. And he gave his kids a communication project. He wanted to teach them how to speak on a specific subject without using notes. And he said this: I came to realize that conversational competence might be the single most overlooked skill we fail to teach. Kids spend hours each day engaging with ideas and each other through screens, but rarely do they have an opportunity to hone their interpersonal communication skills. It might sound like a funny question, but we have to ask ourselves, is there any 21st century skill more important than being able to sustain coherent, confident conversation? Now, I make my living talking to people. Nobel Prize winners, truck drivers, billionaires, kindergarten teachers, heads of state, plumbers. I talk to people that I like. I talk to people that I don't like. I talk to some people that I disagree with deeply on a personal level, but I still have a great conversation with them. So I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes or so teaching you how to talk and how to listen. Many of you have already heard a lot of advice on this. Things like look the person in the eye, think of interesting things, topics to discuss in advance, nod and smile to show that you're paying attention. Repeat back what you just heard or summarize it. So I want you to forget all of that. It is crap. There is no reason to learn how to show you're paying attention if you are in fact paying attention. Now, I actually use the exact same skills as a professional interviewer that I do in regular life. So I'm going to teach you how to interview people, and that's actually going to help you learn how to be better conversationalists. Learn to have a conversation without wasting your time, without getting bored, and please God, without offending anybody. We've all had really great conversations. We've had them before. We know what it's like. The kind of conversation where you walk away feeling engaged and inspired, or where you feel like you've made a real connection or you've been perfectly understood. There is no reason why most of your interactions can't be like that. So I have 10 basic rules. I'm going to walk you through all of them, but honestly, if you just choose one of them and master it, you're already going to enjoy better conversations. Number one, don't multitask. And I don't mean just set down your cell phone or your tablet or your car keys or whatever's in your hand. I mean, be present, be in that moment. Don't be thinking about your argument you had with your boss. Don't be thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. If you want to get out of the conversation, get out of the conversation, but don't be half in it and half out of it. Number two, don't pontificate. If you wanted to state your opinion without any opportunity for response or argument or pushback or growth, write a blog. Now, there's a really good reason why I don't allow pundits on my show, because they're really boring. If they're a conservative, they're going to hate Obama and food stamps and abortion. If they're a liberal, they're going to hate big banks and oil corporations and Dick Cheney. Totally predictable. And you don't want to be like that. You need to enter every conversation assuming that you have something to learn. The famed therapist Eb Scott Peck said that true listening requires a setting aside of oneself. And sometimes that means setting aside your personal opinion. He said that sensing this acceptance, the speaker will become less and less vulnerable and more likely to open up the inner recesses of his or her mind to the listener. Again, assume that you have something to learn. Bill Nye, everyone you will ever meet knows something that you don't. I put it this way: everybody is an expert in something. Number three, use open-ended questions. In this case, take a cue from journalists. Start your questions with who, what, where, when, why, or how. If you put in a complicated question, you're going to get a simple answer out. If I ask you, were you terrified? You're going to respond to the most powerful word in that sentence, which is terrified. And the answer is, yes, I was, or no, I wasn't. Were you angry? Yes, I was very angry. Let them describe it. They're the ones that know. Try asking them things like, what was that like? How did that feel? Because then they might have to stop for a moment and think about it. And you're going to get a much more interesting response. Number 4, go with the flow. That means thoughts will come into your mind and you need to let them go out of your mind. We've heard interviews often in which a guest is talking for several minutes and then the host comes back in and asks a question which seems like it comes out of nowhere or it's already been answered. That means the host probably stopped listening 2 minutes ago because he thought of this really clever question and he was just bound and determined to say that. And we do the exact same thing. We're sitting there having a conversation with someone, and then we remember that time that we met Hugh Jackman in a coffee shop. And we stop listening. We're just waiting for a moment to interject our story about Hugh Jackman and coffee. Stories and ideas are going to come to you. You need to let them come and let them go. Number 5, if you don't know, say that you don't know. Now, people on the radio, especially on NPR, are much more aware that they're going on the record. And so they're more careful about what they claim to be an expert in and what they claim to know for sure. Do that. Err on the side of caution. Talk should not be cheap. Number 6, don't equate your experience with theirs. If they're talking about having lost a family member, don't start talking about the time that you lost a family member. If you're talking about the trouble that they're having at work, don't tell them about how much you hate your job. It's not the same. It is never the same. All experiences are individual. And more importantly, it is not about you. You don't need to take that moment to prove how amazing you are or how much you've suffered. Somebody asked Stephen Hawking once what his IQ was, and he says, I have no idea. People who brag about their IQs are losers. Conversations are not a promotional opportunity. Number 7, try not to repeat yourself. It's condescending and it's really boring. And we tend to do it a lot, especially in work conversations or in conversations with our kids. We have a point to make, so we just keep rephrasing it over and over. Don't do that. Number 8, stay out of the weeds. Frankly, people don't care about the years, the names, the dates, all those details that you're struggling to come up with in your mind. They don't care. What they care about is you. They care about what you're like, what you have in common. So forget the details. Leave them out. Number 9, this is not the last one, but it is the most important one. Listen. I cannot tell you how many really important people have said that listening is perhaps the number one most important skill that you can develop. Buddha said, and I'm paraphrasing, if your mouth is open, you're not learning. And Calvin Coolidge said, no man ever listened his way out of a job. Why do we not listen to each other? Number 1, we'd rather talk. When I'm talking, I'm in control. I don't have to hear anything I'm not interested in. I'm the center of attention. I can bolster my own identity. But there's another reason. We get distracted. The average person talks at about 225 words per minute, but we can listen at up to 500 words per minute. So our minds are filling in those other 275 words. And look, I know it takes effort and energy to actually pay attention to someone. But if you can't do that, you're not in a conversation. You're just two people shouting out barely related sentences in the same place. You have to listen to one another. Stephen Covey said it very beautifully. He said, most of us don't listen with the intent to understand. We listen with the intent to reply. One more rule, and number 10, and it's this one: be brief. All of this boils down to the same basic concept, and it is this one: be interested in other people. You know, I grew up with a very famous grandfather, and there was kind of a ritual in my home. People would come over to talk to my grandparents, and after they would leave, my mother would come over to us and she'd say, do you know who that was? She was the runner-up to Miss America. He was the mayor of Sacramento. She won a Pulitzer Prize. He's a Russian ballet dancer. And I kind of grew up assuming everyone has some hidden amazing thing about them. And honestly, I think it's what makes me a better host. I keep my mouth shut as often as I possibly can. I keep my mind open, and I'm always prepared to be amazed, and I'm never disappointed. You do the same thing. Go out, talk to people, listen to people, and most importantly, be prepared to be amazed. Thanks.
I think what Celeste says there is just wonderful in so many levels. One of them being, it's okay to say that you don't know something. Again, 10, 20 years ago, there's no way you could say that as a leader. However, some of the best leaders are those who have said, I'm great at this, I'm rubbish at that, and that's why I've got these directors. They are amazing at that. You bolster up your skills with other people's skills, and you see that as a strength rather than as a threat. Don't ever see it as a leader, don't ever think because you don't know something and someone else does, that that's a threat. Actually, that's a strength, because that means you're all able to cover the gaps. No one person has all the skills required to do everything. And so that's why you have to have the best team in place. She has a lot of really nice principles there, even about kind of really listening to people. And I think even that comes down to a leader who feels that they have to have all the answers to everything, when in fact, you've got a wonderful team there. Why aren't you reaching out? We live in a world which is much more kind of human-centered design and the approach that we give things. Why are we not giving that within conversations as well? You know, give people the chance to show that they might know the answer. It doesn't always have to be you, the leader. And it's not a weakness if you don't know it. It's a weakness not to point it out in others. And it's a weakness not to bring that strength out in your team. Any leader that's threatened by their team is not a leader. They are scared. They're a scared manager. And there's definitely a difference. So I do like the way that she talks about some of those interesting points that not only we can take out into kind of social conversations, but also into work conversations. And the art of conversation really is something that we have lost a lot of, and it's something that's really important as a leader in order to be able to communicate effectively and kindly and directly. You know, it's bringing some of the other elements that we've already spoken about within your organisation. So the last element I really want to talk about is called a year compass. I think it was developed by an organisation in Hungary, but it's an open source tool and anyone can download it and use it, and it's got it's been translated into lots of languages, and Turkish is one. One extra element that's really important when you're a leader or as a leader is self-reflection and self-evaluation. It's looking at yourself, at what you've achieved and going, oh, that was good. Why didn't I need to celebrate that? That wasn't so good, but what did I learn from it? It's making everything that you have achieved over a period of a year and really learning from it. Now, the year compass is a way of evaluating what you've done, but it also kind of sets up a scene of what you want to come from the next year. And it evaluates you on a kind of work level and a kind of emotional level and a personal level, health and well-being. It goes across, I think it's 6 or 8 different elements throughout the little booklet. This is something that was set up for you as a leader or any creative or cultural person to use, any person wanting to look at and reflect on the way that they work. And it's really wonderful tool to maybe do at the end of the year or the very beginning of the start of the year. I remember one of my mentors, Stuart Cosgrove, who was director of Channel 4, said that the first day back in January, he gets all his staff, all his team to sit down and refresh their CV. And then once they've done that, then the next few days, they start their work. And it was something that he did every single year because it was a way of them saying, what did I accomplish last year? What can I bring into my CV? What can I clean up? Where am I going? Am I going in the right direction? And I think self-reflection, self-evaluation, just like evaluation in general, is sometimes an afterthought. But actually, in order for us to continue to learn and grow, I think it's a really good process that we have to try and involve in our development. Lauren Curry, OBE, who I really recommend you have a look, who runs Upfront Global, She does this every year, and she talks about it on her kind of social media. But this last year, I think it was just this last year, her and her partner did it, and she said it was a really brilliant tool to kind of evaluate as a family what they'd accomplished, and also as a family where they want to go. So she did one a year compass for her business, but then she did one a year compass for with her partner for her family. And it was even things like, what did we struggle with this year? How can we make that better? How can we support one another better, maybe? But I know that she brought up things like, where do we want to live in the future? What do we want to be doing next year? So it can be, it's about dreaming big, and it's about having, I suppose it's a level of accountability, isn't it? When you sit down and look at it the next year and say, I did accomplish that, and you set your next one. So I really highly recommend that you do get into a process of evaluating your leadership style and getting all of your team to do the same as well. So we've come to the end of this webinar. The webinar that's up next, our fourth webinar, is from Gillian Easton, that will be facilitating that. And it's called Engaging with Your Audience, Part 1. And it will consider the wider external factors and actors, so networks, customers, users and audience around us that we need in place for us and our ideas to thrive. Please refer to our webinar guides where you can view the complete presentation and also find all of the tools that we've referred to throughout all of the webinars. So links to anyone we've spoken about or tools that we've recommended are all in the webinar guide. Thank you again for coming to join us, and I hope you can join us for our fourth webinar. Goodbye.